Hello, music lovers. It's 1960. Eisenhower's in the White House. The Cold War is heating up with the U-2 spy plane incident, and American Bandstand is shaping our musical tastes. Today, we're diving into the songs that define this pivotal year in music history and exploring stories you might not know about these classics. Ray Charles Robinson wasn't born in Georgia, but in Albany, Florida in 1930. His early life was marked by tragedy, witnessing his brothers drowning at age 5 and losing his sight completely by 7 due to glaucoma. What many don't know is that before becoming the genius, Charles was actually kicked out of school when they discovered he was blind. The music industry wasn't much kinder initially, with many executives refusing to sign him because they believed his fusion of gospel and R&B was sacrilegious. These executives would later watch him revolutionize American music while they faded into obscurity. By 1960, when Georgia on My Mind topped the charts,
Keeps Georgia on my mind.
Charles had already battled a heroin addiction that began in his teens and would continue to haunt him for decades. The song itself wasn't even written specifically about the state. Hoagy Carmichael and Stuart Gurrell composed it in 1930, supposedly about Carmichael's sister named Georgia. Charles transformed this composition into something transcendent, earning him the first of his 17 Grammy Awards. After decades of musical innovation and a successful battle against his addictions in the 60s, Charles remained active until his death in 2004, leaving behind a legacy that earned him Presidential Medals of Freedom and Arts, induction into multiple halls of fame, and recognition as one of the architects of soul music. What many fans don't realize is that Georgia on My Mind wasn't initially a hit for Ray Charles. When Hoagy Carmichael first recorded it in 1930, it barely made a ripple on the charts. When Charles recorded his version 3 decades later, he never expected it to become his signature song. He included it almost as an afterthought on his album, The Genius Hits the Road. In 1979, the state of Georgia made the bold move of adopting Charles' rendition as their official state song, despite lyrics that could be interpreted as being about a woman rather than a place. When Charles performed it at the Georgia State Legislature after this designation, many of the politicians who had voted for the measure were moved to tears. Ernest Evans, better known as Chubby Checker, was working as a chicken plucker in Philadelphia when he was discovered. His manager's wife gave him the name Chubby Checker as a play on Fats Domino, but what few people acknowledge is that the twist wasn't even Checker's song originally. Hank Ballard wrote and recorded it in 1959 as a B-side, but when Dick Clark wanted it performed on American Bandstand, Ballard wasn't available. Clark, in a controversial move that changed music history, had the young Checker record a cover version and perform it instead. This decision effectively erased Ballard from the narrative of one of the most influential dance crazes in American history, while propelling the 18-year-old Checker to international fame. The twist made history in ways that transcended music. While Elvis had caused controversy with his hip movements earlier, the twist was considered far more dangerous because it was the first popular dance where partners didn't touch each other. A social revolution that horrified parents and was condemned from pulpits across America. The dance was initially banned in many venues, with some religious leaders calling it Satan's work. Yet its popularity was undeniable, becoming the only song in Billboard history to hit #1 in 2 different years, 1960 and again in 1962. Checker, now in his early 80s, still performs regularly and has branched out into food products with his Checkers Snackers line. Despite creating what many music historians consider the most successful dance record of all time, Checker has never been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here's something few people know. When the twist first appeared on American Bandstand, the show's producers were so concerned about its suggestive nature that they instructed camera operators to primarily film dancers from the waist up. This censorship backfired spectacularly as viewers became even more curious about what movements were being hidden from them. The dance's popularity exploded, partly because of this attempted limitation. We want to hear your stories about these songs. Did you twist at your high school dance? Did you face pushback from parents who thought these songs were too provocative? Share your memories in the comments below. And if this trip down memory lane brings back good times, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Anka was just 14 when he traveled alone by train from Ottawa, Canada to New York City with a handful of songs and big dreams. Unlike many teen idols who were manufactured by the industry, Anka wrote most of his own material, an unprecedented move for a young performer in the late 1950s. What many don't know is that the music establishment actively worked against him, with one prominent producer telling him, "Kids don't write songs." By 16, he had proven them all wrong, with his first hit, Diana, which he wrote about his babysitter who didn't return his affections. By 1960, when Puppy Love topped the charts, the 18-year-old Anka had already accumulated wealth that would be worth millions in today's dollars. But his bold decision to bet on himself drew criticism from industry veterans who felt threatened by his success. Puppy Love itself carries a fascinating backstory that adds layers to its innocent facade. Anka wrote it about his real-life relationship with Annette Funicello, the Disney Mouseketeer turned teen idol, whom he was dating at the time. The song was Anka's response to adults who dismissed their relationship as merely puppy love because of their youth. The irony is that while adults were dismissing teenage emotions as trivial, Anka was building a songwriting portfolio that would eventually include Frank Sinatra's signature My Way and The Tonight Show theme. Now in his 80s, Anka continues to perform worldwide and has successfully navigated the treacherous waters of the music industry for over 6 decades. Few fans realize that Puppy Love almost wasn't released as a single. Anka's record label thought it was too similar to his previous hits and wanted something more mature to demonstrate his growth as an artist. Anka had to fight for the song's release, convinced it would resonate with his audience. His instincts proved correct, as it became one of his biggest hits. Even more surprising is that when Donny Osmond covered the song in 1972, he initially didn't want to record it, feeling it was too dated. His version went on to become an even bigger hit than Anka's original, proving the song's enduring appeal across generations. Jack Scott, born Giovanni Scaffone Jr. to Italian immigrants in Windsor, Canada, represented something unusual in early rock and roll, a performer who could credibly sing both rock numbers and heartbreaking ballads with equal conviction. His 1960 hit, What in the World's Come Over You?
What in the world's come over?
Showcased his distinctive baritone, which music critics of the era often compared unfavorably to Elvis Presley. What many don't acknowledge is that Scott faced significant prejudice as an Italian-American artist in the late 1950s, with several radio stations in the American South initially refusing to play his records once they discovered his heritage. Despite these obstacles, between 1958 and 1960, Scott scored more U.S. Top 40 hits than any other artist except Elvis, yet his contributions have been systematically downplayed in most rock histories. Scott's career trajectory reveals much about the volatile nature of the music industry. When he charted an impressive string of hits from 1958 to 1961, the British invasion effectively ended his commercial viability. Record companies that had courted him suddenly couldn't return his calls, leading to a period where Scott, still in his 20s, was considered a has-been. The man who had once sold millions of records was reduced to playing small clubs and county fairs. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Scott avoided the pitfalls of substance abuse, but struggled financially after his brief time in the spotlight. He experienced a modest revival in the 1970s on the rockabilly revival circuit, particularly in Europe, where his music had maintained a stronger following. Scott continued to perform occasionally until his death in 2019 at age 83, though he never regained the commercial success of his early career. Most listeners don't realize that the haunting violin sound on What in the World's Come Over You wasn't actually a violin, but was created by Scott's guitarist, who achieved the effect by using a metal slide and playing near the pickup of his electric guitar. Another fascinating detail is that Scott recorded most of his hits, including this one, with his backing band, the Chantones, who were actually his cousins. This family connection created the tight vocal harmonies that became his trademark sound. Scott also holds a peculiar record in music history. He was the first white artist to have a hit on both the R&B and country charts simultaneously, with My True Love and Leroy in 1958, demonstrating his unique crossover appeal at a time when music was heavily segregated by genre and audience. Jimmy Jones began his musical journey in the early 1950s as a member of the doo-wop group, the Sparks of Rhythm. But most music historians overlook how the industry systematically exploited young black artists during this era. Jones co-wrote Handyman, while in another group, the Savoys, but when the song was recorded in 1959, record executives pushed him into a solo career without his consent, effectively stranding his bandmates. Jones' distinctive falsetto voice made Handyman a major hit in 1960, reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the success came at the cost of his relationships with former group members, who felt betrayed by his apparent willingness to abandon them for individual fame, though the decision had largely been made for him by white executives. The success of Handyman proved both a blessing and curse for Jones. While it made him temporarily wealthy and famous, he struggled to replicate its success. His follow-up, Good Timin', reached number 3, but subsequent releases failed to chart significantly. By the mid-1960s, Jones had been largely forgotten by the American public, though he maintained a following in the UK. The cruelest twist came when James Taylor covered Handyman in 1977 and won a Grammy for his version, while Jones, the original voice and co-writer, had long since faded into obscurity. Unlike Taylor's mellower interpretation, Jones's original featured his trademark falsetto come vocal riff, which he performed because a planned harmonica player didn't show up for the recording session. Jones continued to perform sporadically until his death in 2012, but never received the financial rewards or recognition that his musical contributions merited. That wraps up our journey through 1960, a year when traditional boundaries in music were being tested and transformed. These songs didn't just entertain, they sparked cultural shifts that would explode throughout the decade. If you enjoyed this musical time machine, please subscribe for more deep dives into the songs that shaped our lives.